The sun was slowly rising over the small town and casting a warm light on the streets, where families were already beginning to gather. People were walking hand in hand, carrying little bags and folding chairs, talking softly among themselves and laughing with anticipation. Among them was a single father carrying his young daughter, who was full of energy and curiosity. She was skipping a few steps ahead, but kept looking back to make sure he was following her. He tried to keep up with her small feet and the weight of her little backpack, while also keeping an eye on his surroundings. He was not used to these events alone, but he had promised his daughter he would take her, and he did not want to disappoint her. They found a spot near the stage where other families were starting to settle. Some were spreading blankets while others were setting up small chairs. The father adjusted the little backpack on his shoulder and gently took his daughter by the hand. She tugged him closer to the front, as if sensing something special about today. He smiled to himself, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. The daughter was looking around with wide eyes at the colors and sounds, and she could barely sit still. She pointed to a woman standing on the stage and whispered that she looked interesting, and could she go see her? The father hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should let her move closer to the stage. But the woman noticed them and smiled warmly. That smile seemed to reassure him. He nodded to his daughter and let her step forward a little. The woman on the stage was preparing something different. There were no microphones and no instruments. She simply stood there and waited, her hands at her sides. The crowd grew quieter as they sensed something unique was about to happen. The daughter watched with fascination and pointed at the woman, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. The father tried to hide his nerves, adjusting his jacket and glancing at the crowd. He was used to being careful around strangers and new situations. But there was something in the calmness of the woman on the stage that felt inviting rather than intimidating. As the woman began, she moved her hands slowly and gracefully, signing words that were unfamiliar to most in the audience. The movements were fluid, like a language that only some could understand. Yet her expressions made it clear that her message carried emotion and warmth. The daughter watched closely and mimicked small gestures with her tiny hands, giggling softly. The father watched her more than the woman, smiling at how easily children could find wonder in things that adults often missed. The woman on stage noticed the father standing a little behind his daughter. She paused for a moment, and her eyes met his. The crowd continued to watch, sensing the connection, even though they did not fully understand it. She moved her hands slowly, deliberately, signing 3 simple words directed at him. At first he did not understand and felt a little confused, thinking perhaps she was acknowledging the crowd or another person. Then, something in her eyes made him pause and focus, and slowly the words began to register in his mind. He could feel a strange warmth and hope rising inside him. He looked down at his daughter and saw her staring up at the woman, curious and calm, sensing the importance of the moment. The father did not know what to say or how to react. He felt a mix of emotions he had not felt in years. He was alone in many ways in his life, but this small act of communication made him feel noticed and understood. Around them, the crowd shifted slightly, whispering among themselves. Some were curious, some confused, but no one could look away from the intensity of the connection unfolding. The woman smiled gently and continued her signing. But her message was clearly meant to be private, carried in the motion of her hands and the sincerity in her eyes. The father felt a strange calmness wash over him. He had been struggling to manage work and parenting alone, often feeling overwhelmed and tired. Yet in this moment, all of that seemed to fade as he focused solely on the kindness and simplicity of the gesture. His daughter reached up and held his hand tightly. He looked down at her and smiled, realizing that she too was part of this connection in her own innocent way. The woman on stage finished her small act and stepped back, leaving the father feeling a little dazed. He did not move for a moment, simply standing there and absorbing the significance of what had just happened. He felt that something had shifted inside him, a small spark of hope and encouragement that he had not expected. The crowd began to clap for her performance, some softly, some with more enthusiasm, but he barely noticed. His attention was entirely on the feeling that had settled in his chest. The recognition that someone had seen him, truly seen him, The daughter tugged at his sleeve, asking questions and pointing to the stage, eager to understand. He knelt down to her level and tried to explain in simple words that the woman had said something kind to him. She nodded, accepting his explanation, though she could not understand the depth of what had occurred. They stayed for a while after the performance, watching the other acts and chatting quietly with people nearby. Yet he kept thinking about the woman and the 3 words she had signed. The words seemed small but carried enormous meaning. For the rest of the day, he could not stop replaying the moment in his mind, thinking about the courage it must have taken for her to reach out in such a personal way, and feeling grateful that his daughter had led him there. He knew that life would continue to be challenging, but this encounter reminded him that there were small miracles. Small gestures of human connection that could change the course of a day, a week, or even a life. The sun began to set, and the crowd started to disperse. The father picked up his daughter and carried her toward the car. She chattered happily about the performances she had seen, but he kept thinking about the calmness, the warmth, and the courage of the woman on stage. Something had shifted within him, and he felt a strange but comforting sense of hope. That night, he tucked his daughter into bed and reflected on the day. He realized that the small gestures mattered more than big accomplishments sometimes. He thought about how kindness and recognition could touch hearts and change perspectives. As he lay awake, he replayed the image of the woman signing to him, the way her eyes had conveyed understanding and encouragement. He felt that even though he was alone in many aspects of life, there were moments where human connection could break through isolation and leave an imprint on the heart. And in that quiet night, he made a small promise to himself to notice such moments more, to embrace the small gestures, and to be open to the unexpected ways life could bring hope and warmth. The memory of that day stayed with him for weeks, sometimes returning in fleeting thoughts and sometimes in vivid detail. The connection, brief yet powerful, came a gentle reminder that even in the busiest and most challenging moments, there was room for wonder and human kindness. He began to carry himself with a little more openness, smiling at strangers, helping people when he could, and noticing the small miracles in everyday life. The daughter, too, seemed to be affected in small ways, noticing the kindness in others, imitating small gestures, and learning that connection and care mattered. The father knew that this was just the beginning of a story he could not yet fully see, but he felt ready to embrace whatever came next with a little more courage and a little more hope. Days passed since the event. The father could not stop thinking about the woman on the stage and the 3 words she had signed to him. Every time he went about his daily routine, whether it was preparing breakfast for his daughter or catching up on work, a part of his mind returned to that moment. The simplicity of her gesture had stayed with him, leaving an impression he could not ignore. He found himself replaying the image of her hands moving gracefully and the expression in her eyes. He wondered who she was and why she had chosen to reach out in such a personal way. At the same time, he felt a strange urge to see her again, though he had no idea how he would find her among the crowd in the town that seemed so big and busy. His daughter noticed that he was quieter than usual, but could tell that he was thinking about something important. She asked questions, and he tried to explain in simple words that someone had made him feel noticed in a way he had not felt for a long time. She listened carefully and nodded, happy that her father was feeling better and lighter inside. The father began to look for ways to learn more about the woman and the event where they had met. He visited the community center and spoke to the organizers, asking about the performers and mentioning the woman on stage. He described her gestures and her calm energy. People remembered her and were able to give him some details about her schedule, performances, and even workshops she sometimes ran. The father started attending small events, hoping to see her again. He brought his daughter along, knowing that she had also felt the magic of that brief connection. Each time they arrived at a performance, he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He wondered if she would remember him, and whether the moment would feel as special a second time. Weeks passed, and he began noticing small signs of her presence. Flyers with her workshop schedules, notices about local performances, casual mentions from friends all pointed to the woman appearing regularly in the town. He marked the dates on his calendar and planned their visits carefully. On one afternoon, the father and his daughter arrived at a local park where she was performing again. The stage was set under a large tree, and families were sitting on blankets around the area. The father felt his heartbeat quicken as they approached. The daughter tugged at his hand, sensing his anticipation. She whispered that she wanted to watch carefully and understand everything she could. The woman began her performance, moving her hands in the familiar flowing gestures. The father watched closely, and suddenly she paused and looked directly at him. The recognition in her eyes made his heart lift. She signed something again, not exactly the same as before, but still directed to him. This time he could understand more clearly. Her words carried encouragement and warmth. He realized that she wanted to let him know that she had noticed him thinking about her and that it was okay to feel hope and courage even in small ways. The crowd seemed to sense the connection again, though most did not understand the full meaning. Some whispered to each other, asking if something special was happening. The daughter copied some small signs with her tiny hands, giggling softly, and the father smiled down at her. After the performance, he gathered courage and approached her. He felt nervous, unsure of what to say. She greeted him with a calm smile and gentle eyes. He thanked her for the moment at the first event, explaining that her 3 words had made a difference in his life. She nodded, understanding more than he expected. She spoke softly, telling him that small gestures of kindness could sometimes reach places words alone could not. They talked briefly about their lives, sharing small pieces of information about themselves. The father spoke about raising his daughter alone, the challenges, and the moments of joy that kept him going. She shared some of her experiences, talking about why she performed and what inspired her to connect with people through her gestures. The conversation was simple but meaningful, creating a bond that felt natural and easy. The daughter listened nearby, feeling comfortable and safe in the presence of both adults. Over the next few weeks, the father and daughter continued to attend her performances and workshops. They found small moments to talk to her and share thoughts. Slowly, what had started as a brief gesture grew into a connection built on understanding, trust, and kindness. The father noticed changes within himself. He felt more patient with his daughter, more open to people around him, and more willing to embrace small moments of happiness. He realized that human connections could happen unexpectedly, and that sometimes a small act of courage could transform a day or even a life. The woman continued to perform, her presence spreading warmth among the people who watched. She occasionally signed messages to those who needed encouragement. And the father learned that he was not the only one who had been touched by her actions. The community began to recognize her as someone who brought subtle joy and hope to the lives of those who paid attention. For the father, the experience was life-changing. He felt inspired to be more mindful, to appreciate the small gestures in his own life, and to encourage his daughter to notice the kindness around her. He also realized that sometimes it takes courage to reach out to others, but the rewards could be profound. The daughter learned through her father's example, copying the small signs of kindness, observing the people around her, and developing a sensitivity to emotions and gestures. The bond between them grew stronger as they shared this journey together. They both understood that even small interactions could create lasting impact. The father began to see the world with a new perspective. He noticed strangers who seemed weary, friends who needed support, and simple moments that could be turned into something meaningful. The memory of the 3 words remained with him, guiding his actions and shaping his thoughts. Each performance by the woman was a reminder of the moment that had sparked a change in him. The experience taught him to be present, to recognize the unseen struggles of others, and to approach life with compassion. One afternoon, after a small performance in the town square, he stayed behind to talk to her again. She signed a few more words to him, explaining that sometimes the world is busy and loud, but meaningful moments are always possible if one pays attention. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and realized that her intention was not just to reach him, but to teach him the value of noticing and responding to small gestures of care. Over time, their meetings became more natural. Conversations flowed more easily. The father felt less like a stranger and more like someone welcomed into a circle of understanding. His daughter joined in some activities, learning from her gently, and the bond among the 3 grew stronger. The father knew that this was just the beginning of a story that could unfold in many directions, yet he felt ready for whatever came next. The connection had given him hope, courage, and a sense of belonging that he had long missed. Each day after, he carried the lessons from those moments into his own life, teaching his daughter the importance of kindness, empathy, and courage through small but meaningful actions. The three words remained a guiding light, reminding him that even in the busiest and most ordinary days, there was room for human connection and understanding. He felt that life could be richer, gentler, and more joyful if one was willing to notice and embrace the moments that others created with care and intention. Through these experiences, he learned that the smallest gestures could ripple through lives, creating bonds that were invisible at first, but powerful in their effect. He also learned to trust his intuition to follow the moments that felt significant, and to understand that meaningful connections often appear when one least expects them. The daughter, growing up surrounded by these experiences, absorbed the lessons naturally. She learned to be observant, compassionate, and open to human kindness. Her father smiled at her curiosity and sensitivity. Realizing that these qualities had been strengthened by the experiences they shared together, the father knew that the story was still unfolding, that there were many chapters ahead, and that each encounter, each gesture, could bring new understanding and joy into their lives. He embraced the anticipation and the unknown, grateful for the lessons he had learned and for the courage that had come from a few simple words signed with care. As days turned into weeks, the father and his daughter continued attending the performances and small gatherings where the woman was present. Each time they arrived, he felt a mixture of anticipation and calm, knowing that he might see her again. The daughter skipped ahead, excited to explore the surroundings, while he followed more slowly, his mind tracing back to the moment when she had signed those three words to him. It had been long enough that the memory had settled into him like a quiet reminder of hope and courage. Today was another performance, held in a small hall filled with families and curious onlookers. The father found a place near the center so that he could watch without obstructing anyone and allow his daughter to move freely. She ran a few steps ahead, laughing and pointing at decorations, while he adjusted his posture to be comfortable for the next hour of watching and waiting. The woman appeared on stage, moving her hands with grace and confidence, her expressions gentle and encouraging. The audience watched, some familiar with sign language, others curious and attentive to the emotions conveyed. The father noticed her eyes scanning the room, and when they landed on him, he felt a small wave of recognition and warmth. The way she moved her hands and her subtle smile seemed to speak directly to him, making him feel acknowledged and supported. The daughter watched intently, copying small gestures from the stage with her tiny hands. She laughed softly when she made a movement that looked similar, and the father chuckled with her, feeling his heart lighten. The performance continued. The father found himself focusing on the way she expressed care through small, deliberate movements. It was different from any performance he had seen before. It carried a message not just for the audience, but for those who needed to hear it, like a quiet reassurance that life had moments of beauty and connection. After the performance, he gathered courage and approached her again, unsure of how to begin the conversation. She greeted him with her calm smile, and he felt the tension in his chest ease slightly. He thanked her for the previous gestures and explained how much the three words had meant to him, especially in times when he had felt alone. She nodded and signed a few small phrases in return, which he tried to understand through her expressions and the flow of her hands. He realized she was explaining that sometimes the world felt heavy for many people, and that small gestures of recognition could carry more weight than words alone. He listened carefully, appreciating the simplicity and depth of what she was conveying. The daughter moved closer, curious about their conversation, and he encouraged her to watch. She copied some small gestures, smiling and laughing quietly. The woman encouraged her, making the child feel included and seen. Over time, these meetings became more frequent and natural. The father and his daughter attended workshops she held, learning small techniques and observing the world through a more attentive lens. They learned to notice gestures, expressions, and the quiet ways in which people communicated kindness. The father found himself becoming more patient and observant, noticing details that previously would have escaped him. He saw how small gestures could ripple through interactions, lifting spirits and creating understanding where it was most needed. The woman continued her performances, each one carrying a new nuance or message. sometimes addressed to the audience broadly, sometimes to individuals who needed encouragement. The father began to understand the depth of her intentions, realizing that she was dedicated not only to performing but to helping others feel noticed and valued. His daughter absorbed the lessons too, learning to copy gentle gestures and express care through simple movements. She began noticing the feelings of those around her, offering small acts of kindness spontaneously. The father smiled at her sensitivity, knowing that these experiences were shaping her understanding of the world. One afternoon, after a small performance in a community park, the father stayed behind to speak with her again. The park was quiet, with a few families lingering on benches and blankets. The sun was soft in the sky, casting long shadows across the grass. She signed a few words directly to him, explaining that courage often begins with small actions and that noticing kindness can create meaningful change in life. The father nodded, realizing how much he had learned through these interactions. He thanked her and spoke about the ways he had begun applying these lessons in his own life, whether by being more patient with his daughter or by offering small gestures of care to neighbors and friends. She smiled gently, acknowledging his words, and the exchange felt like a quiet celebration of shared understanding. The daughter watched nearby, her eyes wide and curious. She asked simple questions, and the father answered carefully, ensuring that she understood the meaning of the gestures and the value of paying attention to small acts of kindness. Over the next few weeks, they continued to follow her performances and workshops. Each encounter added layers to their connection, not just with her, but with each other. The father found that he was growing more comfortable with expressing care and openness, while the daughter thrived on the gentle guidance and lessons embedded in the performances. Life at home began to feel richer. Small routines, once ordinary, were now filled with subtle gestures of care and attention. Breakfasts, walks to the park, and quiet evenings became moments of connection and learning. The father noticed the changes in himself and in his daughter, feeling a quiet satisfaction that was both comforting and energizing. One evening, as they walked home from another event, the father reflected on the journey so far. He realized that the 3 words she had signed were only the beginning of a much larger lesson. They had opened a door to understanding, patience, and courage that he had never fully explored before. The daughter skipped ahead, humming softly, and he watched her, feeling proud of how much she had learned from observing kindness and gentle gestures. The father thought about the future, wondering what other lessons and connections awaited them. He felt a quiet sense of readiness, knowing that life was unpredictable, but also filled with opportunities for meaningful human connection. He understood that the small steps they were taking together, guided by the examples they observed, were shaping a foundation for resilience, empathy, and hope. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between the father, his daughter, and the woman on stage deepened. They had created a rhythm of attending performances, learning gestures, and reflecting on the lessons embedded in those moments. Each interaction was simple but profound, reinforcing values of compassion, observation, and quiet courage. The father felt that he had discovered a new way of seeing the world. Small gestures mattered. Observing and responding to kindness mattered. Being present and attentive mattered. He carried these lessons into his everyday life, applying them in ways that strengthened his relationship with his daughter and deepened his appreciation for others around him. The daughter grew in awareness and empathy, often sharing small gestures she had learned from observing the woman. She smiled more, laughed freely, and noticed the feelings of friends and family members. The father smiled quietly at her growth, realizing that these lessons were becoming part of who they were as a family. Through these experiences, the father understood that life was not always about grand achievements, but often about the small moments of connection and understanding. He felt grateful for the opportunity to witness and be part of these lessons. Knowing that they had the power to shape lives in meaningful ways, the woman continued to be a quiet force in their lives, guiding, performing, and demonstrating the importance of noticing and caring for others. Her presence remained a source of inspiration and subtle encouragement, reminding the father and his daughter that even the smallest gestures could create lasting impact. In quiet moments at home, the father reflected on the journey. He thought about how far they had come since the first encounter, and how meaningful that brief moment had been. He understood that human connection was fragile but powerful, that courage, even in small doses, could ripple through lives in unexpected ways. The daughter drifted to sleep nearby, exhausted from another day of learning, laughter, and exploration. The father stayed awake a little longer, thinking about the lessons learned, the bonds created, and the hope that remained alive in his heart. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he felt prepared to face them with patience, awareness, and an open heart. Through observing kindness and embracing small gestures, he had discovered a new depth of understanding and a renewed sense of hope. He felt that he had been given a gift, a simple but powerful reminder of the importance of human connection, and he resolved to carry that gift forward, guiding his daughter and himself toward a life filled with care, courage, and meaningful moments. Time continued to pass, and the father and his daughter found themselves more involved in the small community events where the woman performed. Each visit brought a sense of familiarity, yet every performance carried new surprises and lessons. The daughter eagerly led the way, exploring the decorations and finding new friends in the crowd, while the father followed. Feeling a mixture of anticipation and quiet joy, he noticed how his daughter's excitement was contagious and how she absorbed every small detail with wonder. The woman appeared on stage, her movements gentle and expressive. The father observed her closely, noting the way her eyes connected with the audience and how her hands conveyed messages that went beyond words. He felt a sense of peace watching her, realizing that her presence alone carried comfort and inspiration. The daughter copied small gestures, laughing softly at her own attempts to mirror the performance. The father smiled down at her, feeling proud of her curiosity and sensitivity. After the performance, he approached her with a growing confidence that had developed over weeks of interactions. He thanked her once again, explaining that her gestures and presence had inspired him to notice small acts of kindness and to share them with his daughter. She responded with subtle signs, acknowledging his words and encouraging him to continue observing and practicing care. They walked together for a short distance, discussing simple ideas about life, hope, and the importance of noticing moments that often go unseen. The father found the conversation refreshing, simple yet profound. Allowing him to reflect on his own life and how he could create meaningful connections, the daughter followed closely, occasionally asking questions and receiving thoughtful answers. Her understanding was growing, and she began noticing things she had not paid attention to before, like small gestures of kindness among strangers and quiet expressions of care from friends and family. In the following weeks, the father and daughter continued attending performances, workshops, and small gatherings. Each encounter strengthened the bond among them and deepened their understanding of human connection. The father learned to listen more carefully, to observe subtle signs of emotion, and to respond with empathy. His daughter learned to express herself gently, using gestures and actions to communicate her feelings and observations. One afternoon, the father stayed behind after a performance to speak privately with the woman. They walked slowly through a quiet path lined with trees, sunlight filtering through the leaves. She signed a few words explaining that courage and connection often started with small steps, and that noticing and responding to others' needs could have a ripple effect that went far beyond what one could see. The father absorbed the meaning, feeling a quiet determination to apply these lessons in his daily life. He spoke about the small changes he had noticed in himself and his daughter, the way they were learning to observe and respond to the world around them. She listened carefully, acknowledging his observations and offering encouragement through subtle gestures. The daughter, playing nearby with other children, occasionally looked over to them, her curiosity and attention making the father smile. Their bond was growing, and he realized that she was learning more than just gestures. She was learning empathy, patience, and the quiet power of connection. As the weeks turned into months, the father noticed how these experiences were shaping his family life. Small routines became moments of reflection and learning. Meals, walks, and playtime were infused with observation, kindness, and gentle communication. The daughter began to anticipate opportunities to offer care, whether to friends, family, or even strangers. The father felt a quiet pride and satisfaction in watching her growth. The woman continued to perform, her presence steady and reassuring. She sometimes offered guidance to those who sought it, subtly teaching lessons about observation, patience, and empathy. The father realized that her influence extended beyond the performances, shaping lives through gentle encouragement and example. Each interaction added depth to their understanding and strengthened their sense of connection. One evening, the father reflected on the journey. He realized that the 3 words she had signed weeks ago had set in motion a series of lessons and experiences that had profoundly impacted him and his daughter. They had learned to notice, respond, and participate in the quiet currents of kindness and human connection. The daughter, sitting nearby, asked thoughtful questions and shared observations, demonstrating the ways she had absorbed the lessons without being told explicitly. The father smiled, realizing that she was learning through experience, observation, and gentle guidance. Their bond had deepened through shared experiences, mutual understanding, and the subtle influence of the woman on stage. The father felt a growing sense of readiness and courage to face challenges. Knowing that empathy and observation could guide him through difficult moments, he also felt a sense of responsibility to carry these lessons forward, not only for his daughter, but for himself and for others who might cross their path. Over time, the father and daughter began to notice how small gestures could influence others in ways that were often unseen. They started practicing these gestures in everyday life, offering help, support, and care to those around them. Friends, neighbors, and strangers responded, sometimes subtly, sometimes with visible appreciation, reinforcing the lessons they had learned. The woman remained a quiet guide, her presence a steady reminder of the power of attention, care, and gentle courage. She continued to perform, teach, and connect, inspiring the father and daughter to grow in understanding, empathy, and observation. One afternoon, after a performance in a small garden, the father lingered to speak with her again. The garden was calm, filled with soft light and the quiet sounds of nature. She signed to him about the importance of noticing the moments that others might miss, and how small acts of kindness could ripple through life in ways that were often invisible. The father listened attentively, reflecting on the ways he had applied these lessons and the changes he had seen in himself and his daughter. He spoke about how these experiences had made him more patient, more observant, and more open to connection. She acknowledged his words with gentle signs and a smile, reinforcing the quiet power of encouragement and recognition. The daughter played nearby, occasionally imitating gestures she had seen, and he watched with quiet pride, understanding that she was internalizing lessons that would shape her perspective on life and relationships. Over the next few weeks, they continued attending events, observing, learning, and practicing kindness. Each experience reinforced the importance of connection, observation, and courage. The father and daughter began to see the world through a lens of empathy, noticing the struggles, joys, and unspoken needs of those around them. Their bond strengthened, not just between themselves, but with the community. As they applied what they had learned through interactions, gestures, and care, the father reflected on how much their lives had changed since that first encounter with the 3 words. The memory of that moment remained vivid, a gentle reminder of the power of human connection and the importance of noticing and responding to others. He felt grateful for the lessons learned, for the growth in himself and his daughter, and for the influence of the woman who had sparked the change. Life continued, filled with small challenges, moments of joy, and opportunities for connection. The father and daughter moved forward with greater awareness, empathy, and courage, embracing the lessons of kindness, observation, and quiet strength. They knew that life was unpredictable, but they were prepared to face it with openness, compassion, and a deep appreciation for the subtle yet profound power of human connection. Through these experiences, they learned that meaningful relationships, courage, and understanding could begin with simple gestures, that observing and responding to kindness could ripple through lives, and that the journey of growth and empathy was ongoing and ever-changing. Months had passed since the first encounter with the woman and the 3 words she had signed. The father and his daughter had grown into a gentle rhythm of attending her performances, participating in small workshops, and learning to observe and appreciate the subtle gestures of kindness around them. Each visit brought new experiences, new lessons, and moments of connection that strengthened the bonds between them and the community. The daughter ran ahead, exploring the decorations, the sounds, and the laughter of other children. The father followed at a slower pace, absorbing each detail, noticing the subtle smiles, the quiet nods, and the small ways people interacted with one another. When the woman appeared on stage, the father's heart lifted. She moved with calm and grace, her hands telling stories that went beyond words. The audience watched attentively, and the daughter copied gestures, giggling quietly as she tried to mimic the movements. The father watched them both, feeling a quiet satisfaction at how much they had grown from that first encounter. After the performance, he approached her again. They walked slowly through a quiet path lined with trees, sunlight casting soft patterns on the ground. She signed a few words, acknowledging the progress he and his daughter had made. She explained that small actions and gestures could ripple through life in ways that were not always visible but deeply felt. The father listened carefully, thinking about how the lessons had influenced his relationship with his daughter. His view of the community and his understanding of life. He spoke about the ways he had become more patient, observant, and willing to connect with others, even in small ways. She nodded subtly, reinforcing the importance of those small but meaningful gestures. The daughter joined them, curious and eager to participate. She copied some gestures, laughing softly, and the father encouraged her. Watching her, he realized that the lessons of empathy, kindness, and attention had been absorbed naturally. They were now part of her, shaping her understanding of the world and the people around her. Over the next few weeks, the father and daughter continued to attend events, workshops, and performances. They practiced what they had learned, noticing and responding to gestures of care from others. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers responded in subtle ways, creating a web of connection that they could feel but not always see. The father reflected on how much their lives had changed. The small gestures, the quiet encouragement, and the lessons learned had created a sense of belonging and hope that had been missing before. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, not only as a parent but as a member of a community that could influence and be influenced through empathy and care. One day, they attended a large community gathering where many families were present. The father noticed that the crowd, though large, carried a sense of anticipation. He scanned the area and saw familiar faces from previous events. The woman appeared on stage and began her performance, her movements calm and expressive. She paused at certain moments, making eye contact with him and his daughter, and signing words that carried encouragement and hope. The father felt a sense of recognition and understanding. The daughter copied gestures, smiling, and the father realized that these shared experiences had created a quiet bond that went beyond words. The performance ended, and the crowd applauded. The father approached her, feeling a mixture of gratitude and admiration. They spoke quietly, sharing reflections on the journey so far, the lessons learned, and the ways they had applied them in daily life. She signed words of encouragement and acknowledgement, emphasizing the importance of continuing to notice, respond, and connect. The father felt a sense of completion, understanding that while life would continue with challenges, the lessons and connections formed through these experiences would remain a guiding force. The daughter joined in, showing small gestures of understanding, empathy, and care that reflected what she had learned. The father smiled, feeling proud of her growth and the shared journey they had experienced together. Over the following weeks, the father and daughter carried the lessons into their daily routines. They noticed small gestures of kindness in others, offered support when needed, and embraced opportunities to create connection. The community, in turn, responded, forming bonds that strengthened the sense of belonging and shared understanding. The woman continued to perform and teach, her presence a constant source of inspiration. The father realized that her influence had been subtle but profound, shaping his understanding of life, relationships, and the value of attention and care. One quiet evening, as they walked home from an event, the father reflected on the journey. He thought about how the 3 words had sparked a series of experiences that changed the way he viewed life. The lessons of empathy, observation, and gentle courage had become part of their daily lives. The daughter walked beside him, holding his hand, asking questions, and sharing observations. He answered thoughtfully, realizing how much she had internalized and how naturally she applied the lessons learned. The father knew that life would continue to present challenges, but he felt prepared to meet them with patience, awareness, and an open heart. The experiences had taught him that small gestures could ripple through life, creating change in ways that were not always immediately visible but deeply felt. The daughter, too, had grown, developing a sensitivity to the feelings of others and an appreciation for the power of subtle communication and kindness. Their bond had deepened, strengthened by shared experiences, reflection, and the lessons imparted by the woman. Together, they had learned that human connection, courage, and empathy could begin with a simple gesture, a sign or a few words conveyed with sincerity. As the months continued, the father and daughter integrated these lessons into their lives. They practiced noticing, responding, and creating connection wherever they could. Small acts of care became part of their routines, and they observed how these gestures affected others in quiet but meaningful ways. The father felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that the lessons learned had transformed not just his perspective, but the life of his daughter and the community around them. The daughter thrived, showing empathy, understanding, and kindness in ways that reflected the experiences they had shared. The father recognized that these qualities were being nurtured naturally, through observation, participation, and gentle guidance. The woman remained a guiding presence, teaching through performance and example, encouraging attention, care, and courage. The father and daughter carried her lessons forward, applying them in everyday life and creating a ripple of kindness and understanding. One evening, as they watched the sunset together, the father reflected on the journey from that first encounter, when 3 simple words had changed his perception and brought new meaning to his life. He understood that meaningful connections could begin in the most unexpected ways, that courage could be found in small gestures, and that human understanding was a powerful force that shaped lives quietly but profoundly. The daughter leaned against him, holding his hand, her eyes reflecting curiosity, understanding, and the joy of learning. He felt a quiet contentment, knowing that they had grown together, strengthened by the lessons of empathy, observation, and gentle courage. The father realized that life was filled with opportunities to notice, connect, and respond, and that the lessons they had learned would guide them through challenges and joys alike. Together, they walked forward, carrying the memory of the 3 words, the influence of the woman, and the understanding that human connection, even in its smallest forms, could transform lives in ways that were powerful, meaningful, and lasting.